Welcome to Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Reuben, Abati, and Thisday Live begins now. You're watching Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show here on our Rice News channel. And I'd like to welcome today's panelists, YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor BOLA AKINTERINWA, Director General of the Bolytag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Well, YEMI and Prof, I think it would be appropriate to wish you Eid Mubarak. And also our viewers, we felicitate with all our Muslim viewers on this special occasion of the end of the fasting period, the Ramadan. Amid the ravaging COVID-19 pandemic, the Islamic faithful today quietly offered prayers and supplications to celebrate this year's Eid al-Fitr. Also called the Festival of Breaking the Fast, Eid al-Fitr marks the end of the month-long dawn to sunset fasting in the holy month of Ramadan. Now, the usually large, colorful gatherings have been largely reduced to physical distance gathering of a few people in open places and in some cases in mosques. No thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. In Nigeria, most states have placed bans on public gatherings, except for a number of states, especially across the Muslim North, where restrictions for the faithful were eased to allow them to pray in congregations, but with strict adherence to social distancing and other anti-COVID-19 protocols. Meanwhile, the spread of coronavirus in Nigeria, as announced on Saturday by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, confirmed 265 new cases. The total tally of infected persons in the country rose from 7,261 to 7,526. But no virus-related death was recorded in a day for the first time in the month of May 2020, as the death toll remained at 221. Well, it's Eid al-Fitr. Across the world, it's been a very somber, less colorful celebration. Across the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, all the way to Oman, and even all the way to Turkey, there were no congregations. People were asked to pray at home. In Saudi Arabia, there were prayers in mosques in Mecca and Medina, but no worshippers. And here in Nigeria, in some states, some governors allowed people to go and worship, particularly in Nasarawa, Borno, Niger, Bauchi, and a number of other states, including Kano. And in Kano and in Niger State, we saw that people, yes, went to the prayer grounds, but what happened in Mina was that there was a heavy downpour. At the end of the day, people rushed into the mosque and they did not observe any social distancing. It has also been reported that in Kano, there was no social distancing, and the governor himself was there, and he too did not observe any social distance. And this was the original concern of the Sultan of Sokoto and the Nigerian Supreme Council of Islamic Affairs that advised that people should pray at home. In all the places where people were allowed to congregate for prayers, they also violated the rule about not having a gathering of more than 20 persons. People gathered in their hundreds in Kano and in Niger State and also elsewhere today. So it looks like the federal government is saying one thing, the Islamic leadership is saying one thing, but the followers are doing something else, and the governors are playing politics. However, President Buhari led by example. He prayed within the premises of the Aso Villa with only members of his family. And, you know, that's a good example. However, many of the governors did not lead by example. Prof, I'll start with you.
I like that. The Yoruba people have one saying. It is that you don't force a child, young people, inexperienced people, not to go to where they call Langbodo Mountain. Langbodo is a name of a place. You discourage young people from going there. Why? Because of the difficulties, the challenges, the risks, the threats to their life. So if you tell a young person not to go to what I will call prohibited areas, and the young person decides to go there forcefully, then why will you expect any sympathy for such a person? How is that one related to the narrative you've given us? If people refuse to comply with simple instruction that is meant to ensure collective safety, but from an individual, the individualistic perspective, you opt for selfish interests, ulterior motives, to disregard the safety of the generality of the people, then the ideal thing is to allow such individuals to suffer. That is the ideal thing. Because if you do not want to learn lessons from the empirical cases of others, if you do not believe that COVID-19 is a reality, it's not a dream, if you say this time God will come down to your church or to your mosque to deliver you directly from the pandemic, then you should face the music. People should know quite well that God works through people, through the wisdom of some people, knowledge of some people. The issue is that I find it very irritating that a given Nigerian, will want to flout another. Even the world headquarters of the Islamic faithfuls, they respected the regulation. Why do you want to be holier than thou? So in this case, very honestly, I am saying that if you allow people to go through the ordeals of the pandemic, one time they will sit down and learn from the difficulties. It's because they are still surviving that they are able to say they are going to flout the regulation.
YEMI.
And you see, you are.
YEMI.
I can understand the case of rainfall. You now have to rush into the mosque. But why do you even congregate outside? In the first case.
Well, I mean, what we have seen in other parts of the world, in Thailand, for example, where the Eid al-Fitr is referred to as the Hari Raya, they observed social distancing. Temperature checks were taken at the various mosques. And then at the end of the day, they also took down the names and addresses of everybody at every mosque so that, the state will be able to contact trace them should there be... but here, nobody took any precautions. YEMI.
Well, I think that's really the case. Because we continue to say, you said, I think it was yesterday, that we're still at 221 deaths. The fact of the matter is that COVID-19 has manifested in Nigeria and on the continent generally in a very less virulent manner. And because of that, people are responding to what they see rather than what could be. So it becomes very difficult, especially when you then layer that, as you said, on multiple messaging from government officials. So the Sultan of Sokoto, who's by all sense and purposes the head of the Muslims in Nigeria, says, because of what is going on, let everybody pray at home. But some state governors decided to say people should relax their restrictions, say people should come to the mosque, and say they should observe all guidelines, knowing fully well that these guidelines will not be observed, because today is not any different than yesterday. So people cannot go around not observing guidelines yesterday, and suddenly you think that today, they're suddenly, I think it will just come upon them, like, oh yes, today we are going to be COVID-19 compliant. So, and the governors know that. So I think to your point, definitely playing politics, and also by their action, undermining the gravity of what people's health and putting their citizens at risk. So even if the governor of Kano himself can attend such prayers, and I even believe in Sokoto, if I'm not mistaken, can attend such prayers without observing set guidelines, you can't blame citizens. So citizens really ultimately must now, unfortunately, have to decide for themselves.
Anyway, let's take a quick commercial break. When we return, I'll come back to you. But just note that in all the places, they all wore masks, face masks. Whether that was enough, it remains to be seen. It's time now for a short break here on Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I'm Reuben, Abati. Still with me in the studio, I have YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and Professor BOLA AKINTERINWA, Director General, Bolytag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Now, YEMI, before we went on break, you were commenting on the Eid al-Fitr, which has been observed today.
Yes. I mean, to your point, in Mecca, Medina, no worshippers allowed. In Nigeria, we chose to do as we will. But again, back to the irresponsibility of our political leadership. And this is from day one, where they did not isolate when they traveled from high-risk areas, arrived back in the country, continued to mingle, infected other people, caused, in a sense, a death, if I want to say that, and now translating that to their citizens. So really, for other influencers or other voices who understand the importance, we can't leave this sensitization to governments because they continue to oscillate between what they want to do and leading by example. So we must just continue to take personal responsibility and encourage those within our areas of influence to do the same.
Let's just add by way of footnote that all the Muslim clerics who preached today, they talked about love, they talked about compassion, they talked about humility, patriotism. Now, you know, the major problem we have with religion in Nigeria is that there is a public side, there is a private side. The private side is dominated by piety. The public side, you know, is removed from the private part. So we will expect that after the fasting period, all Muslims and also all Nigerians will continue to abide by the ideals, the essence of Ramadan. And we should see this in terms of behavior within the public space. People should not be religious in the corners of their rooms and then behave like people who have no fear of God in the public space. Prof, you agree?
I do not agree. You see, I cannot understand how you preach only to one section of the community. You have just told us, and we have just seen, that the leaders, the governors, the religious leaders themselves, all right, are divided on this. Some are respecting the COVID-19 regulations, the guidelines. Some are not. And most unfortunately, it is precisely the leaders who are required to provide leadership by example that have not been following. Now we are happy with President Muhammadu Buhari, who has provided leadership by example. But his lieutenants, his generals on the field, in the various states, are not. So if the leader is not showing discipline, is not showing, you know, what is Ramadan? Ramadan is a period where you are supposed now to show charity, give food to the poor, you know, show that there is God, godliness. But now, we are now saying that it is only the living who can be able to show love to others. It is the living who will be able to engage in acts of charity. It is the living who can now come out into the public and now say, look, we want you to behave in a godly manner. But when you are not living, if you are dead, how can you promote Muslim values?
On that note, Prof, let's take another subject. You already mentioned President Muhammadu Buhari, and our next story is about President Buhari just recently, President Muhammadu Buhari signed an executive order for the implementation of financial autonomy for the legislature and the judiciary at the state level. The new order follows a presidential implementation committee that was constituted to fashion out strategies and modalities for the implementation of financial autonomy for states' legislature and judiciary in compliance with Section 121, subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution. This section of the 1999 Constitution states, and I quote, "Any amount standing to the credit of the judiciary in the consolidated revenue fund of the state shall be paid directly to the heads of the courts concerned." The new order, tagged Executive Order Number 10 of 2020, for the implementation of financial autonomy of state legislature and state judiciary order 2020, is aimed at strengthening the financial autonomy of the judiciary and legislature at the state level. Now, the president issued this executive order number 10 actually on May 22. And as I've tried to introduce the topic, it grants autonomy. It means that the old practice whereby governors will collect money on behalf of the legislature and the state judiciary, and they will use it to play politics, to intimidate these two arms of government, that will no longer happen. And this is a direct outcome of the fourth alteration of the Constitution, the fourth alteration bill of the Constitution. And here we have the president giving his assent and backing it up with an executive order. Yemi.
Okay, so I guess maybe I should ask you, since you're the lawyer in the mix, did he need to do that? I mean, it's in the Constitution. Is it so?
No, that section of the Constitution was altered. So, and he needed to give his assent to the alteration.
So, in a sense, in his assent, so to speak. Well,
yes.
And I guess, as I've seen in media spaces, lawyers are happy about it. And I think from paying local governments directly, which is not...
local governments are not included in this.
No.
The state legislature
I understand.
And the judiciary.
I understand. I'm saying from paying local governments directly to now paying the legislature and the state and the judiciary directly at the state level, we begin to hopefully empower the different arms of government financially to be able to take decisions, so there's less politicking at the executive level.
Whether that of the local governments has already been effected.
I know Kaduna is doing it
through the amendment of the Constitution or the alteration of the Constitution.
But I know, for example,
what has happened was that there was a directive by the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the governors kicked, and the governors said that they will go to court, and they've gone to court. But of course, the autonomy at the local government level will also be very important.
Yeah, what happens? Yes. You have rightly explained it. In part, the government, the president has signed, like he has just recently signed an amendment that, look, the local government councils should be autonomous too. They should no longer be dependent.
You have to amend the Constitution.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That section of the Constitution has not yet been altered. And it's on the basis of that the governors have gone to court.
The dispute is still on. I'm not trying to make the point that...
Does it need to be amended to be operational? I guess that's the question.
Yes, because it's a constitutional matter. And the state governors were insisting on their own rights. But what we would like to see, of course, what the president has done, in my view, may probably be one of the most important things that will be regarded as his legacy.
In fact, it's the
ensuring independence.
First and only thing he has done since 2015 to date. Because that is what has been generating national controversy. People have been talking about restructuring.
June 12 was major, sir. I would disagree with that. June 12 was quite significant.
The most important, that's comparative. June 12 was important.
No, so you said the only. Okay, sorry.
The only yes and most yes.
Okay.
Because you see, this one borders essentially on national restructuring. It borders on calls for true federalism. Now this time...
And the doctrine of the separation of powers.
So this time now you are now giving a meaningful expression to a true federal system in the making. So by the time you now enable financial autonomy, it's very critical to both the legislature and the judiciary. That means now he's thinking rightly, he's on the correct path to now building a new foundation for a united Nigeria. He's already trying to disarm people who are talking about self-determination. All right. So it has...
So we do the independence of the tiers of government and
yes.
then do the independence of the arms of government, then
yes.
to your point,
yes.
the conversation becomes a lot more meaningful around our federal nature, so to speak.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it all. Even though the governors are kicking against that, they are only doing so for selfish reasons.
Obviously.
Well, I think the whole point is about the independence of the legislature at the state level, whereby you find many of these state houses of assembly have become appendages of the government house, and speakers of houses of assembly have become errand boys to the governors, and the governors are encouraged by that fact to abuse their position. Ditto for the judiciary, although I would not want to throw the judiciary under the bus, but there have also been allegations that the judiciary has not been as independent as it should be at the state level.
Empirical cases are many. Have you forgotten the time we'll have a judge holding meeting, taking decisions midnight during the June 12 policies all along? So you see, this is the time we are now talking about meaningful independence, autonomy, separation of powers of the various arms of government. I think PMB is now beginning for the first time, all right, to live up to expectation. There is the need for a president of a nation to ensure, national unity, national cohesion. And I think what he has done now is one of the pillars.
Well, I think, what we should also note is that the alteration, the fourth alteration bill of the 1999 Constitution, has also given effect to a number of things. Now, there's alteration number 9, which allows the INEC more time to be able to conduct by-elections. There's alteration 21, which says that, look, pre-election matters must be determined before election.
But that hasn't really come into effect. I mean, Bielsa was a good example of that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of the things that the president has just assented to.
You see, it's not that...
And then there is alteration number 16, which says that if you have been vice president or deputy governor, right, and then you succeed your principal for any reason whatsoever, you can only run for election not more than once. So, but let's take...
But you see, those who are kicking against that, the governors, the arguments they have come up with cannot just be thrown into the basket. There are some logical points there. The only thing is that they unnecessarily go beyond national interest. They are saying that, look, if you want to give financial autonomy, they are not against, but they want it to go through due process.
Well, Prof, on that note, we'll take a short break again here on Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I'm Reuben Abati. Still with me in the studio, I have YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor BOLA AKINTERINWA, Director General Bolytag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Prof. and YEMI, thank you for staying with us. Now, next topic, let's take another topic after that discussion of fiscal autonomy for state legislature and judiciary. Nigeria's oil revenue target fell by 125.52 billion naira in the first quarter to 940.91 billion naira, according to figures released by Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed. The shortfall attributed to the double whammy of the headwind caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the slump in oil price due to a sharp drop in demand and price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, representing a 31% of the prorated oil revenue target. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, also showed inflation hitting a 2-year high at 12.34%. Besides, the World Bank had projected that based on its assessment of Nigeria's economy, the country will plunge into a recession. Now, clearly, this was the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning giving a press briefing after the meeting of the National Economic Council. And she did say that, the country's economy will contract by about 8.94% if the fiscal stimulus that have been provided do not work at all. But if those measures that have been taken work, then, of course, we could see a contraction of about 4.04%. But if additional measures are taken and those measures work, then the government may be able to keep the contraction within the economy to just about 0.5%. So she sounded very optimistic, but whether those measures, fiscal measures that government is applying or will apply, will work, is another thing entirely. However, she also talked about government's commitment to provide support for the states to ensure the viability of the states. And in that regard, we're told that the World Bank has promised about $1.5 billion in terms of support for states in Nigeria, and that this will be disbursed latest September, with some of the states getting up to 15 billion or 20 billion. Now, the question again is, how will those state governments, manage the resource? But clearly, it looks like a recession is in the offing, and how government manages that recession. Some people even say, no, we're not looking at recession, we're looking at depression. All of this will have implications for poverty figures, which at the moment stands at 40.1%, and also for the development process, and also, of course, for household and livelihood. And with inflation at 12.34 by end of April, it looks like it could get worse with the lockdown, with COVID-19, and with the continuing closure of the border. Yemi, let me start with you.
Well, so let's start with our approach to COVID-19. So I think what I gather from state governors is that because of the non-virulent nature, it's basically saying that we will focus on those who would get seriously ill. And in the interim, where Lagos is focused on primary healthcare and local governments, people who get ill, mild to moderate symptoms, self-isolate, get treated at home. And if we continue along that path, that then means that the economy can continue to be opened as people return to work and finding ways to stimulate the economy in terms of generating productivity, so to speak. But I think in parallel to that is, as we said earlier, is not taking the potentials of the virus for granted. And I think in as much as you have said that whichever way we dice it, we're going to have a recession, it is critical that government, which hasn't done very well over this administration particularly, and government in general really, hasn't done very well in terms of communicating with Nigerians, in terms of just understanding what it is that we have at stake. So yes, it hasn't been as virulent, but let's not then take it for granted and not be as careful as we should be, so we can be, as Prof said, be alive to actually run the economy. Having said that, the opportunities that I still see that the government keeps missing in all of this. You talked about poverty figures. In all the palliatives that's been distributed and trying to reach the bottom of the pyramid, I don't see any data being collected in a sort of systematic manner to say that if this is our reality for now, we need to know where people are, we need to know what their challenges are so government can then intervene. We see small businesses complaining that they don't see any help from government in terms of ensuring that they stay in business.
Well, there's a 50 billion Naira put in place by the Central Bank of Nigeria to help SMEs.
Yes.
And another 100 billion Naira to help pharmaceuticals.
Yes, in theory. I'm saying people who are, I have friends that run businesses. So how does that translate in real terms is what I'm saying. I don't see that, don't understand the translation from what we say we're doing to what is actually being done so those businesses can stay afloat and are able to pay salaries. And again, communication. So I think really, ultimately, in as much as whatever policies we want to put in place and whatever fiscal stimulus packages, those things need to translate into real terms, not just things that we say at press briefings and meetings.
Well, Prof, I'd like to take your input, but maybe you want to comment a bit on the states. The federal government says it's willing to assist the states. I mentioned the World Bank $1.5 billion support that is being expected. But also, the federal government has acceded to the request of the Nigeria Governors Forum to suspend all payments on outstanding loans and guarantees, and also deductions on debt obligations.
I would like to look at the problem differently. The major problem is not, strictly speaking, recession or depression. I think it is essentially how to convince the Nigerian people to learn how to be perseverant, tolerant, to make them understand that we are in very difficult times. And they should now try to seek understanding of the situational reality on ground, so that whether it is recession, whether it is depression, then they will now prepare their minds to a difficult time. Whether, for instance, we have international assistance from the World Bank, whether the federal government now says, okay, look, we will give you this assistance, etc. If the governors, to begin with, do not even attach importance into the fact that they are faced with a very serious economic challenge, I don't know how that one can have any positive effect. For people who are already used to not respecting any regulation, people who believe now that, look, this lockdown is a period set aside to contain the spread of COVID-19. In fact, what we should be discussing is not assistance to any governor. It is the current issue of the insecurity that is looming. I think one Nigerian reported, they wrote a letter to the United Nations, and they are now saying that genocide is imminent in the various states. That's what they are talking about. They wrote to the UN. And basically the point they are drawing attention to is the influx of the Nigeria. Yes. And they provided an extensive analysis that in the southeast in particular, and then the southern states in general, that the situation as of today is such that genocide cannot be ruled out. 5,000 arms, weapons, put, recovered, seized from some trucks. They are in a video now circulating worldwide. Now, how will you expect not to have recession and depression when attention will not be given to economic development strategies, but to the current threats? Is the federal government even looking at all these threats as they are? So you have COVID-19 threats on the one hand, killing people. You now have the allegation and people complaining bitterly that federal government's lockdown, directive, instruction, is now being taken advantage of to export, quote and unquote, the Almagiris down with weapons. So please, I think that, my problem is not the concerns you are drawing attention to. The problem is no longer economic questions. It's now insecurity.
In addition to, not no longer.
Well, insecurity is a major challenge, and we've seen that it's not going to disappear because we have COVID-19. But the economics of it, which the Minister of Finance was pointing out, is that if revenue has dropped by 31%, what does it mean in real terms? And if the crude oil accounts for about 90% of revenue, and about 60% of foreign exchange earning, then of course it means we're in very serious trouble. And with poverty level above 40%. Now, what must government do to get revenue? How will government service debt, right? Even if it doesn't get debt relief. Our foreign reserve is down. Our debt profile is rising, even if officially the debt management office says the debt burden is sustainable. So these are many of the questions. The residue of it is that it is the ordinary man that will bear the brunt. Yeah, the average Nigerian.
But I think also, sorry sir, I think also what is important is not just what the federal government does, which is maybe a bit of what Prof is saying, but also what state governors do. So when we are waiving payments and you are giving money with no conditionalities attached, federal government is saying let's streamline MDAs to reduce the cost of government. I have not seen any state government speak to that effect.
Well, some of them have got salaries of political appointees.
Towards COVID-19, not because there's an economic issue, but they're saying they're donating it towards COVID-19.
Well, we need to take a short break now again on Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I'm Reuben, Abati. Still with me in the studio here, I have YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and Professor BOLA AKINTERINWA, Director General, Bolytag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Now let's go to Hong Kong. American politicians are leading worldwide condemnation of China's plans to introduce a tough new security law in Hong Kong. The move comes as police in the self-governing territory fired tear gas and pepper spray to disperse thousands of persons protesting against Beijing's plan in what was the highest flare-up in the city since COVID-19 lockdowns began. The new bill will ban treason, sedition, and subversion in the territory. A total of 17 U.S. Congress members have put their names to an international statement calling the plan an assault on Hong Kong's freedoms. Last year's anti-government protests plunged the city into its biggest political crisis in decades, battered the economy and posed the gravest popular challenge to China's President Xi Jinping's authority since he came to power.
We must stand up and fight and to let Beijing know that we will never surrender. And today, more than 1,000 Hong Kongers gather on street again is the proof that we will fight back. National security law is even more damaging and harmful than the extradition bill last year introduced by the government. And now, when time is running out in Hong Kong, or we would describe as the beginning of the end. Now, we don't have enough time, but we still need to continue the fight.
Well, the people of Hong Kong are back at the trenches after the protests we saw last year, June to September 2019. And then we had a few months of respite. But now China wants to introduce a new security law, what it calls the draft decision, which has been opposed by 200 political leaders from 123 countries that consider it an aggressive assault on fundamental human freedoms in Hong Kong. And of course, the people are back on the streets. They're protesting. They brought back the 5 demands. They're talking about Hong Kong independence, and they are opposed to China. But this bill is supposed to be tabled by May 28 and to be ratified by the end of June. So we're likely to see very interesting developments in Hong Kong between now and June ending if the Chinese authorities do not back down, with Carrie Lam and the governing authorities in Hong Kong going the way of China, naturally, expectedly, perhaps. Prof.
I think we can look at the issue from 3 perspectives. The first one is that the main reason responsible for the June to September 2019 protests was largely ascribed to opposition to Chinese request for extradition. Extradition was what was responsible by that time.
That's correct.
And the people of Hong Kong looked at it to say, no, it will be an opportunity for government in Beijing to be running after opponents, opposition leaders. That was what largely explained that one. But that extradition too was necessarily linked to the issue of security. Now, when you look at the position of Beijing, Beijing is not likely to accede to the idea of independence of Hong Kong, at least not for now. Because the Chinese look at it to say what transpires in Hong Kong is not a result of the wishes of the people of Hong Kong, but essentially on the basis of the whims and caprices of the Americans. So the Chinese are not in any way prepared to accept the principle of nearness of America in his blood. You know, Shakespeare said in Macbeth, the near in blood, the nearer bloody. In other words, why do you have to give any opportunity for the Americans to now come closer? Because independence for Hong Kong means giving room for the whole Western world to come and settle. Another perspective there, issue is the issue of the principle of self-determination. In international law, the United Nations accepts the rule of self-determination, and that is what the people of Hong Kong are trying to capitalize on. There is going to be a very serious controversy, a very serious threat to regional security in the near future.
Also, as we have seen, the capacity of Hong Kongers to insist on their right to choose. YEMI?
I think that's really, for me, that's important. I mean, so no social distancing, but I think it's extremely important that Hong Kongers continue to maintain that this is a fight that we believe in and a fight that we're willing to fight. And if nothing else for the rest of the world, is just that determination. And from a relatively young population as well, who understand the consequences and understand what is at stake and are willing to not just talk about it on, as we like to say in Nigeria, on social media, but actually put boots to the streets and make their position known.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot be more correct. Okay, let's take our final topic for today. The traditional White House portrait unveiling may be skipped for the first time in decades. According to reports, President Donald Trump will not host a ceremony unveiling the official portrait of his immediate predecessor amid burgeoning tensions with former President Barack Obama. Now, all U.S. presidents since Gerald Ford, save Jimmy Carter, who requested not to have a ceremony, have returned to the White House at some point during their successors' first term for an unveiling of their official portrait. First ladies have also traditionally attended the ceremony, and their portraits are unveiled as well. But Trump has no plans, it seems, to invite Barack Obama and Michelle Obama for such a ceremony. What this might mean is, if Trump wins a second term in November, it could be 2025 before President Obama returns to the White House to see his portrait displayed. Yemi, I'll start with you. President Donald Trump and Obama and what he calls Obamagate. I guess this is part of it.
Well, I think it just reinforces President Trump's pettiness, really. And it's really quite unfortunate. But, I mean, President Obama continues to be, in a sense, the bigger person. No chip off his back. There's nothing. I doubt even if he will say anything about it if he's not invited. But I think, I mean, no matter how, he was president of the United States, not for 4 years, but for 8. It costs you nothing to unveil the photo, be there, shake his hand, make it as short as possible, and keep it moving. But to prove a point that you're upset, throwing a tantrum like a 10-year-old child is really quite unbecoming of the president of the United States. But then again, he doesn't lay claims to providing any global leadership or national leadership. So it is what it is.
Well, Prof, what's your interpretation of this? Is this President Trump throwing tantrums or just playing politics?
I will even argue this time that Yemi is more correct. You see, the portrait is not an issue. It's not even as important as the painter. I am more important, you know. Kehinde Willie.
Yeah.
He's
the Nigerian artist?
Yes, he's a Nigerian American. All right. He is the first with Ami Sherrod, black artist, to have been invited to paint, to provide this portrait. So Barack Obama is the first African American to be president of the great United States. And in this case, you now have another Nigerian African American, the first one to be asked to provide the portrait. This is a source of sweet inspiration. So Donald Trump can continue to belittle himself while the opportunity is given for people with wider, perspectives. Yeah. Americans need people like Kehinde Willie to sustain his leadership of the world.
Well, as it is, President Trump is playing politics, as it were. Politics of racial division, politics of blaming the other, and politics of election year.
Indeed.
And he blames everybody for whatever goes wrong. Well, on that note, we'll have to call it a day right now. You've been watching Thisday Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Reuben Abati. From our entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now. And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday. Thank you.